Welcome to the Suncoast In-Depth podcast. I'm Brett Watson. I'm joined here by my good friend, Brice Ferguson.
Good afternoon.
What's my name for you? Professional skeptic.
There you go. I like it. Professional implies I get paid for this, so I'm more of a hobbyist.
I'm asking for a 50% increase in your pay.
Fantastic. I was shooting for double, but we'll take 50%. It's better.
All right, good. So thanks for doing this.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So what we're doing in this series, I'm just interviewing people, asking them about their own journey, spiritual journey. There is a growing demographic of people who are coming out of institutionalized religion, particularly the evangelical movement, deconstructing for various reasons. And by deconstruction, we mean dropping beliefs in their particular belief system.
Sure.
And many of those people, as I look out across social media, they are floundering. And like I've said in the other videos, they're throwing they tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater, or the baby Jesus out with the bathwater. So,
I suppose that's one way to word that.
Yeah. I know you have a story, so I wanted to give people a chance to hear it.
Sure. I guess to talk about where we are, we should start where we've come from, right?
Mm-hmm.
So growing up, I grew up in Florida, here in our own backyard, and the largest religious influence in me in my young adult life, or my young life actually, was my grandmother, my paternal grandmother. She was a church 3 nights a week and on Sundays volunteer at the church kind of individual, evangelical. I couldn't tell you the denomination at this point, and she's not around to ask, but she always instilled upon me the value of John 3:16. That was her go-to verse. That was the faith that she had, and she truly believed that as long as you believed in Jesus, you were saved, and if you didn't believe in Jesus, well, sorry about your luck. As I grew up, family took me to Southern Baptist churches, Methodist churches, and as a kid, it was something I did with the family. I didn't think much of it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until I was just about to have my own independence, senior year in high school, I was working, I lived at the time in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I was working in a retail computer shop. And on a particular day, a guy comes in and he needs to purchase something for his small business. It wasn't a major transaction. He gets up to the register and we're helping check him out, make sure it was the product he needed and all that. And in that moment, his card was declined. He didn't have any cash. We tried to do a check and it was declined. The guy didn't have any money. It was just the situation he was in. He was trying to get this thing for his business and he couldn't. It just was an impossibility. So dejected, he went out. He's like, okay, I'll figure it out. I'll be back later. These things happen. He gets out in the parking lot and his car's been stolen. So here's this guy stranded, no money, no transportation. And yeah, we're on an island, but still, it's a big island if you've had a chance to go. And if you haven't, maybe something for a future date.
I have.
And in that moment, I had just finished having the conversation with my family the day before about the fact that once I graduated that year, they were moving back to the mainland. They were coming all the way back to Florida. If I wanted to stay, I was going to have to figure it out. So I was in personal turmoil about, okay, how am I going to make this work? Okay, if I do this much in sales, I can make these kinds of commissions on top of a salary while juggling going to school full time because I wanted to go to college out in Hawaii, and then also figuring out how to actually afford to eat and live. And at that time, a one-room studio, the size of this studio, in fact, smaller than this studio, was going for about $2,200 a month.
Ooh.
Well, this was in
this was
in 2002, so you can extrapolate where that would be today.
Yeah.
I could make the numbers work if I had multiple roommates in that space and didn't mind working 2 full-time jobs and then somehow sleep and go to school. And yeah, it just, the mental gymnastics I was going through to get to the point of success with that was difficult. In that moment, I watched this guy who didn't have 2 nickels to rub together in that moment. And he was in a time of crisis. Our manager ended up providing him a personal ride home at the end of the day to make sure the guy got home safe. And there was a moment of clarity. And I can explain it scientifically. I can explain it through the emotion. But to me, it was a moment of divine conversation. The clear message was that if you stay, this will be you. This is what's going to happen, and you're not going to have a support system, and you'll be 5,000 miles away from everybody you know and love. And I was completely at peace with the fact that I wasn't going to stay. Like that.
Okay.
It was as though a switch had been flipped. That was the first time in my life that I had ever felt that way. And I've told that story to many people, and they're like, oh, well, yeah, you just had a moment of clarity, or people with more faith are like, yeah, that was a moment of God speaking to you. And I can accept the fact that I don't know what it was, so I have to be open-minded to what it was. But to me, in that moment, and since then, I've carried it forward as a divinely inspired moment in my life. That was in 2002. We're in 2023. So 21 years of life have happened since there. 21 years of experiencing the good, the bad, and the ugly of what the world has to offer, getting better understanding scientifically of how the world works, talking with many people of faith to get their views on how the world works, watching faith be used as a tool both for the greatness of mankind and for the detriment of mankind. And in so doing has caused me to have a lot of introspection, not just about that particular day, but about faith in general. So now I find myself, someone pushing 40, as having done a lot of reflection. And I'm kind of to the point where I have a lot of questions that I understand and appreciate the fact are not directly answerable. Things like logical inconsistencies through the concepts of a higher power and the things that we project on that entity. Even the fact that I said person there might be an example of one of those things, those projections, and the expectation that we may falsely put on this being or energy or deity or whatever sort of nomenclature you'd like to use there. Yeah. Force, yes, Luke, exactly what I'm talking about. So I find myself with lots of questions, which of course has led me down my own path of deconstruction, my own revising of the things that I have learned and the understandings that I was brought up with and the acceptance that those were people's opinions and views and not necessarily my opinions and views. And it's led me on a journey of trying to figure out answers and solutions for myself. It's also, unfortunately, led me into the concepts of determinism, which we've touched on before, which I don't think we need to dwell on today unless we're supposed to. And and in so doing has got me into a spot where I've almost come to accept that maybe the questions that I can't have answered are just going to be where I'm at. So I'd love to walk the line on some of those, and without the expectation that we're going to definitively answer any of them, because I understand that they are not necessarily answerable, but also just to further the conversation, just between a couple of folks in a recording booth to put it out there and see where it goes.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Wow. All right. Just give me a blank slate. I like that. That's brave. So for me, obviously, there's some big brush strokes that we paint God with, right? The fact, we'll start with the biggest one to me, the fact that God is omnipotent, all-powerful. Conceptually, all-powerful is in itself a paradox, because in our understanding of the physical world, there are things that you can't have two of simultaneously. Great example, and I love using this one because it's tongue-in-cheek humor and relatable. Can God microwave a burrito so hot that he can't eat it? If the answer is yes, then he lacks omnipotence because he can't eat it. And the answer is no, then he lacks omnipotence because he can't do it, right? It's a paradox. It's a logical paradox. It's a logical fallacy. That's a small, minor example of the things that indicate to me that maybe us putting this designation on God is not exactly fair. Because if you look at it, the systems that we live in, the universe, the cosmos, the rules of nature as we understand them, the laws of physics, the laws of chemistry, everything that we have discovered gradually through the course of human existence indicates that that there are going to be some things that are bigger that we don't yet know, right? We continually discover things that we don't know, then we discover a path to knowing them, right? And it's been my personal belief that this, should there be a God, has been one of the greatest gifts mankind has received, is the gift of scientific discovery. If anything, to me, science tells us how.
That seems to be objectively true.
And then religion would tell us why. Does that make sense? They're not answering the same question. So I hear a lot of people talk about how you can't both have a scientific analytical mind and think that faith is real. I feel like that conversation comes up regularly on both sides of the conversation, and I don't necessarily agree.
I definitely don't agree.
I figured you wouldn't.
Yeah.
We probably wouldn't be having this conversation if you did, right? So for me, I look at the concept of someone being all powerful. And again, someone is that projection of the entity, correct?
Yeah.
And it's difficult because then I look at the idea, well, we also assume that God is just, truly just, correct? So if that is the case, then there must be a justification for the things that happen in life that we can't justify. And in the writings that I sent you, I used an emotionally sparking example that everybody uses as an example of pediatric cancer, right? What is the justification behind that? Why does it exist?
Yeah.
And I've heard the argument, well, you have to have the dark to appreciate the light. And I understand that. But when I take a bird's eye perspective on that concept, I go, well, why was the system designed that way? If we have this all-powerful being that is all-powerful, they can do literally anything, then the system itself could have been designed different.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
So let's talk about one at a time.
Yeah, I know I just kind of word vomited. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Good questions that a lot of people don't dare to ask. So when you said I was brave, I would say right back at you.
I appreciate that.
Omnipotence is not seen at the scholarly level. Omnipotence is not all-powerful the way most people think about all-powerful. It's all things that are possible for God.
Then my immediate follow-up question is, what defines what is possible?
Well, for example, I can just give you an example.
Mm-hmm. And I've already used the burrito, so you can't steal that.
Yeah,
that was mine.
Mutual contradictions. God is not able to make a circle square.
Okay.
It's either a circle or it's a square.
Then on a more macro scale, because we'll call that a logical rule. Logically, a circle is not a square, correct?
Right.
Who designed the logical rule? Because that is a thing that exists within our reality, correct? It's a conceptual thing, but it exists within our reality. Mm-hmm. And if God created all things, I would have to assume that God created that concept as well. Mm-hmm. That to me, logically, that's where it goes. Mm-hmm. So if God created these refinements of possibility, then couldn't God then also possess the ability to unmake those refinements of possibility? So then God, to be all-powerful, would have to have the ability to remove his own limitations. Again, him being a projection of whatever.
Yeah, that's okay.
So I get stuck in this cycle of, okay, well, then what about this next layer and this next layer? And eventually I get to the point where maybe it's just unfair to even call it that.
I don't know. I think that, I think where you're going with that is, well, if he remakes reality so that a square can be a circle, mm-hmm. I think that there's still, you have to have a definition for something, right?
Sure.
It is what it is. So that would be one of those logical truths that would be reality in every possible reality. There is no largest prime number.
Mathematically, we can explore that. Mathematically, we have no proof to show a largest prime number. Great mathematicians throughout centuries have worked on that. We mm-hmm. know based on our current knowledge, our current understanding mm-hmm. of I shouldn't say numerology, but of basic arithmetic even, that is not something that's been defined. So nobody can counter that point. So we can agree that as of now, we know that there is no largest prime number. For that, in our numerical system, our understanding of quantity, which is what we typically use numbers for, that appears to be true. The concept is, what if that isn't how the universe is designed? And this is where we get to the point where the limitations of the human mind of how to visualize what a possibility.
Yes.
I don't know the answer to how to do that.
Yeah.
I can't sit down and draw a non-three-dimensional example of what that might look like because we live in a three-dimensional world, or we actively functionally exist in a four-dimensional time. Anyway, we can get that conversation later. Then in that world, right? But what if that's a system that God could have made completely different? He didn't, and I can accept that. But if he could have, then there is no real limitation on God. But in our line of logic that he provided us with, and our logical minds that we are gifted with, I'm assuming, it leads to logical inconsistencies in the concept of all-powerful. And I understand within the rules, all that is possible. I get that. Mm-hmm. But then it just comes back to me. It circles all the way back around to, well, who defines what's possible? And it would have to be God himself. Them, they, self, itself. Yeah.
Just pick one.
Just pick one. We'll go there. We'll call it him since it's traditional. And I'm full of tradition.
Yeah, sure you are. Well, obviously, this is one of those questions where there is no concrete answer for all the reasons you laid out. But the way that I escape my mental gymnastics is I
just getting warmed up.
I look for What is the most plausible construct of reality if I were to include the things that I cannot empirically prove? Just for sanity's sake, right?
Well, obviously, there comes a point in the thought process where you got to be, well, kind of is what it is.
Yeah.
I can't unimagine reality.
Right.
But as a thought experiment,
Yeah.
it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
It also leads to more questions that become, in my opinion, also unanswerable.
And there are definitely questions that are unanswerable, right? How could you possibly know the totality of what this construct of God could be? How could you possibly do that?
Currently, we can't. We don't possess the intellectual capacity, nor the mechanical capacity or the digital capacity to fully analyze much of anything. Which is incredible considering I have the culmination of human intelligence in my pocket right now, accessible at my fingertips. And it's a drop in an ocean if you really take an objective look. Just the things that we know we don't know outweigh the things that we do know. And that's fun to say out loud. Sorry, audience, for having to try to work through that word salad. For example, human consciousness, right? Big mystery. Some of the brightest minds believe it has to do with the current array of neurosynapses in your brain and how they are configured. And that's what makes me, me, and you. Problem is there's 100 billion of them in the brain, and they're each connected in 10,000 different ways. So the combinations and permutations of that are not currently calculable. We can take estimated large numbers and guess what that might look like, and some people might be able to provide mathematical proofs that result in a final number that's greater than the total number of atoms in the known universe.
Yeah.
Not a usable bit of data.
Yeah.
We don't yet own or have the capacity digitally to map that, to replicate that.
Right.
But we're working on things like quantum computing, which current quantum computers, which are just in their infancy, are, when coming to dealing with things like that, 1 million times faster than traditional processing power.
Oh, yeah.
1 million today. That
Every
exists
qubit
now.
is just the exponential speed at which calculations can be made. It just...
Correct. But as we discover those things, just simply charting airflow off of the wing of an airplane in real time is almost insurmountable to do the math on all the various particles that are involved in that. But as we develop new technology, we get more answers, right?
Yeah.
I don't see a point in the future where we have the technology to answer these questions. I don't know that there will ever be a time. So I kind of wish I could stop asking them. But somehow, Brett, I can't. So if omnipotence is something that we agree we really can't answer, there are some great explanations, and I feel like I kind of cut you off on talking about the power of what is possible. So I apologize for that if I did.
No, you didn't.
But it kind of segues me into the next characteristic that we put on God of omniscience, all-knowing.
Okay.
Well, if you're all-powerful, then the power you would have is to know, correct? So I can accept the fact that there may be a possibility of an all-powerful being viewing time as we know it completely differently, seeing the beginning and the end simultaneously and all things in between, and knowing where time goes. I can understand that experience may be different than what we perceive. We perceive time linearly at a rate of 1 second per second, right? So we're time travelers. Look at us. But if God is all-knowing, then clearly he would have to know where the timeline goes. So I've heard it said, and help me with this, that God understands the possibility of where things could go. Well, possibility to me implies a lack of full knowing, which would be most knowing, but maybe not all knowing. And if he's all powerful, then he should already know what's going to be determined, which that kind of travels into determination, which I don't know if you want to get on today. So I'd love to know that your position on the concept of omniscience.
Yeah, it would be along the lines of knowing all potentiality. So, but mind is not deterministic. So he knows all potential timelines. He knows the choice you just made to drink that He
I was always
knows
going to make that choice.
the choice. I know you're a determinist. He knows the timeline that does not include that choice.
There's an infinite number of those.
Yes.
That's many worlds, my friend.
Yeah. And God is infinite. Yes, that's many worlds. Yeah.
It would make sense.
Yeah.
Which I would like, if we have time today, to kind of tease on that and my thoughts.
Sure.
That might actually answer my questions at some point.
I don't know why you don't see, this is what I would ask you, why is that not all-knowing?
Well, knowing the possibilities is knowing the options, but all knowing would be knowing the options selected. While still knowing what all the options were,
Yes.
to me.
And all the selections
Correct. So if
that led to those ends.
well, all selections that are made were led to, I would argue, as a determinist.
I know.
Which kind of defines the timeline that we experience.
Which made me chuckle when I read your paper and it said, forgive this free thought.
You were either going to or you weren't. Which it's not really free thought, I guess, when you put it that way.
That's my point.
It is hard to wrap determinism in the vernacular that we currently use
Yes.
when we talk about things, because it's very easy to forget that that's your viewpoint on things until you sit down and you really think about it. Because our day-to-day lives don't feel like it's predetermined. We feel like we're making decisions all the time because we are. The issue I come up to, and again, we'll only go into this if we're supposed to. The issue that I come up with is that the implication is you had the ability to make a different choice than you did. When, to our knowledge, with the exception of radioactive decay, which just because we haven't found it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, with the exception of radioactive decay, we don't have random in the world. Every action has a cause. So if every action has a cause, then the cause itself was an action that was caused, that itself was an action that was caused, and you can trace that back. Problematic. Again, for the whole God knowing everything. So the whole omniscience thing, for me, is, well, then if God already knows the possibilities of these things happening, and he knows the choices that we will make because he's all-knowing, which is how I see it, and I understand that that's not necessarily how it's understood by other scholars. Let me preface to say I'm certainly not a scholar. I'm a layperson. Then to me, the concept of consequences or any sort of punishment for a human decision or indecision, as there, in my mind, could only be one decision as you make choices, seems to make no logical sense at all. Because if it was already understood that this is what was going to happen, then why would there be consequences if this is what was going to happen?
Yeah, without volitional will, it doesn't make any sense.
Okay. Good. I'm gonna explain this to my wife when I get home, when I didn't take out the trash. It was always going to be that way, babe.
That's why I think there is some mysterious volitional will. Because what we can observe about reality doesn't make a lot of sense without it, to me, where I've gone in my own thought experiments. So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer to you or not.
I preface this by saying I don't know that we're going to be able to get you can't give me that answer and say it'll be what it's supposed to be. You're not helping. You're not helping. No, and we preface this whole conversation with the understanding that we may not get any satisfying answers. That's not the point. The point is to have the conversation, to work through and unravel the tangled spaghetti that is my thought process on this, right? And hopefully, by so doing, if we have any audience members left, that they may have been like, I was thinking something like that too, and they made a great point that maybe I shouldn't worry about this. And then I guess the third omni in this is omnipresence, right? God is in everything. God is everywhere at all times, right? And we talk about this a lot here, that even in your darkest moments, there's another in the fire, right?
Yes.
Of course, I guess it wouldn't be the darkest moment if there's a fire. Anyway,
In a
logically incongruent, but you understand the idea.
Yeah.
So for me, I then circle that back to the idea of justice and omnipotence, right? If you're all-powerful and you're watching a family lose a child to cancer, because that's an emotionally sparking conversation, is that if God is there in the moment, as we purport him to be, and he is all-powerful, meaning he can change the circumstance of the situation, yet he doesn't, then that projects to me that he can't be just as we understand what justice is. Because what did that innocent child do that required that level of justice?
And of course, you could just as easily assume you're making assumptions on, based on your understanding of justice.
Correct. And I get that. I will wholeheartedly admit that our, and by our, I may just mean my interpretation of justice could be wholeheartedly different than God, who is the creator, his interpretation of justice. And I guess it wouldn't be his interpretation then, would it? It would just be his directive of justice, because it's kind of his show.
Yeah, it would be, yes. But again, we're getting back to the necessity. All of us really end up constructing a model of reality that includes mystery.
Some people
want to think about it more than others, but
a known unknown. Like, I know I'll never know this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I can construct a satisfying model, in my view.
I would love to hear.
Where using your example, this is going to make me sound so cold.
I may have a solution to this, by the way.
Let's say that
not coming
my
in
child,
unprepared.
Okay. Let's say that my child had cancer.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to kick you underneath the table.
And died. Let's say Joseph, my youngest. Yeah. Okay. From my vantage point in this reality, it would seem like such a waste. It would not seem just based on my understanding of justice, given my observation of reality, including my own feelings and thoughts and so on, right? But I can see a reality where these temporal lives are stages wherein we grow, maybe life to life, where maybe reincarnation is a thing, let's say.
Could be.
And my soul, which is just a fraction or a fragment of the source that we're calling God.
Sure. I can get behind that.
Is developing, and across many, many lifetimes, maybe even other dimensional lifetimes.
Yeah.
Till it returns to the source with that unique cluster of experiences, right? In that model of reality, if I believe that, okay, or I see it as at least a plausible scenario for reality, gives me a certain level of peace concerning Joseph's cancer and his death.
Because it was in the ultimate eternal spectrum, the greater good, which is a dangerous concept in even of itself.
Yes, but I'm a dangerous guy.
I can tell. Yes, it's the.
I don't really get why is that dangerous. I think that it's inevitable.
The concept of the greater good, maybe not in a biblical sense, but it has been used to justify all kinds of atrocities.
Human existence. Yeah, it can be dangerous. Sorry, I didn't
mean in the grand scheme of things. I meant in the human existence scheme of things.
It can be dangerous in this temporal reality, right? This temporal experience. But if there is an immortal soul, which I happen to believe there is,
no evidence that there's not.
No evidence that there's not. Some. Not
which, by the way,
evidence
that's a logical fallacy I just threw out there. I just want to see what you do with it. It's hard to prove a negative, Brad.
No evidence that there isn't. No evidence that there is. But let's talk about evidence, okay? The reality is that there are many, many things that we experience in reality, that we observe in reality, that cannot be proven empirically.
I'd say that's fair.
That doesn't mean that there's no evidence.
Okay.
Your experience, your God moment that you talked about, it was an experience. You can't replicate it in a lab. I don't know. There's no way for me to know exactly what you felt or why you have a belief that was a God moment or why you wouldn't believe that it was a God moment. There's just no way.
Yeah. It could have been a mixture of chemicals in my body telling me it felt that way, or it could have legitimately been a divine message.
Yes.
And I have no evidence one way or the other to answer that.
Right. So then we're back again to we construct a model of reality.
Fair.
My goal is that I want to construct a model of reality that is not devoid of evidence. Okay, I want to avoid that. Because I think that that's just altogether unhelpful. Even if this is the only existence I'll ever know, I think that is an unhelpful construct.
I think that we can all agree that this is the only existence you'll ever know right now.
Yes. But if I'm an immortal soul inhabiting a human body, then it's not the only existence that immortal soul would know.
Now I'm going to break your brain. if time's not linear and God is omniscient and he knows all things and he can see the whole timeline, just because we are actively in this soul experiencing this time right now doesn't mean in a different life, maybe you experience this time again as the same soul in a different soul or a different person or a different existence or a different plane of reality. Very conceptually difficult things. Again, for the last person that's listening, we appreciate you sticking with the podcast. We haven't taken the wheels off yet, but they're going to happen here in a minute, I think.
Kyle's sleeping. I
don't blame him. Hopefully he's trolling Reddit or something at this point.
No, I love talking about this stuff. I can see a reality where that your soul, whatever that is, can exist in two different life experience.
There is a great short story, and I've shared this with your wife actually. You'll have to forgive me, I don't know the author, but if you Google the short story and the title is called The Egg, it comes up immediately. It's a 10-minute read, and it's just a conceptualization of this idea.
I think Kurt Scott did a video on that.
Excellent. To me, I absolutely love the thought experiment that is that story.
Yeah.
The premise being, without ruining it for anybody, is that you do experience more than one life and how that helps you build and grow.
Yeah.
And the ultimate purpose of that is laid out in this beautiful little piece of writing. I love that thought experiment. I love thinking that that's a possibility, because one of the things that I think that you and I can agree on is there's no way to have a full answer to basically any of this stuff. This is definitively what it is.
Yeah.
Because then we would be untrue to the intellectual nature of this conversation, right?
Yes.
So in that vein.
Totally agree.
In that vein, I'd like to propose an idea, a thought.
Please.
That I'm sure I'm not original in thinking this, because there are currently 8 billion people in the world and some 106 billion people thus far.
I'll let you know if it's original.
Give or take. Oh, thank you. I appreciate you. Will you check the archives of thought for me and just see if anybody's spit this out there before? Yeah. So one of the things that in the last 100 years that has been a great addition to humanity's understanding of the working universe is quantum physics, quantum mechanics.
Yes.
Understanding the things that are super small. The building blocks not of matter, but the building blocks of atoms, which are considered the building blocks of matter. And in part of the understandings with quantum mechanics, and I am myself no mathematician nor theoretical physicist.
Neither am I.
Again, I'm a layperson. So
we have Kevin here.
Those of you, and Kevin would probably tell me the 37 different ways I've already been wrong in the past 3 sentences on that.
I wish you were here.
Yeah, well, so do I. But he and I could go at it, and he could help me understand things better.
Prime number, for example, that's a proof. That's a done, over, it's proven.
Fantastic.
Anyway, but I can't lay that out for you as to why he can.
Excellent.
Anyway, go on.
Moving on. Within the quantum world.
That was a prime example.
Yes. And we're done here. This was a fantastic podcast. I appreciate your time. Because we're not getting a better dad joke than that, which is really unfortunate now that I think about it.
We will if we're supposed to.
In the quantum world, one of the theories regarding how the world physically works is called the many worlds theory. And I won't get into the Copenhagen theory of quantum mechanics and all this stuff, but we'll talk the many worlds theory, which the concept behind it is that at every point of interjection in existence, every action that happens creates the world that we experience, and then any alternative option that doesn't happen also exists, but not in a realm of our existence. Yes. Consider the proverbial
separate
dimensions,
of reality.
Right? Yes, correct. And there could be as many as an infinite number of these from any given point. For example, I'm going to use an explosion in space, a supernova, correct? Matter is scattered to the cosmos. Energy is scattered to the cosmos. And in that moment, in some sort of understanding of the universe, all of those things go to some place. But every place they didn't go, for each of those particular atoms and subatomic particles, every place they didn't go is a place they could have gone. There's some non-0% chance that it could have gone elsewhere in this many worlds theory. And because of that, each of those non-existent locations themselves now sparks potentially another realm of existence. Okay, that's very big strokes. But let's make it much simpler. I knocked over my water bottle. That was the existence you and I just traveled. And all of the times that I didn't knock over my water bottle just then spawned an infinite number of different possibilities where this conversation could go. There, in one alternate possibility, it started raining outside, and another alternate possibility, a volcano opened up underneath us. All of these things that are a non-zero,
asteroid hit the Earth and we were vaporized.
A non-zero chance. It could be infinitesimally small, but it's a non-zero chance.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
Those realms could exist. That's what this quantum theory of the many worlds posits. So let's assume on face value that some variation of that is true. Now let's look back at my previous questions. If God is just and a child has cancer, and in my realm of existence that child dies of cancer and God is walking with that child, but that is only one of many worlds that simultaneously exists, and in one of those worlds that child doesn't have that cancer and was healed in that moment under divine circumstance,
and thrives,
then the justice exists. But because of the very nature of existence, the unjust variation has to exist too. So what if my experience in those moments is just the variation that is the part that I get to experience, but not the true nature of the infinite possibility of that moment? And I know that's a lot to digest, and I know that we lost all of our audience 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
But between you and I...
That's why it's okay to talk about
That's
it now.
right. Correct. Yeah. And if you happen to be tuning in now, good luck. But for you and I, we're not going to experience the vastness of that. And in fact, I don't even know that the human consciousness in its current form can even really put thought to what that might look like. But if I use that and know that, okay, maybe it's not this infinite world in that moment that has the justice, but that it does exist, then just because I'm not experiencing it doesn't make it not real, and would therefore rectify the concept of God being all-powerful, made that moment correct, just not in my experience. And that broke my brain. And I'm sure I'm not the first person to go walk down that path, but it's fascinating.
It is.
Truly fascinating. So if
It makes God much bigger, actually.
It makes everything infinitely bigger.
Yeah.
It takes this whole, hey, we're going to church on Sunday concept, and that's our life. Makes it kind of feel like a tiny little drop, and no longer just the ocean, but maybe in the universe.
It's definitely a tiny little drop.
And
I don't know how you get away from that.
an infinitely expansive universe. Well, there are people that live their whole lives in their life without thinking about any of this, and they live a wonderful life. And
Sure.
they're wonderful to people, and everything is grand, and I love that. But there are also other people that use their tiny little life to impose all kinds of negativity things on other people. But here's the kicker. Maybe that's just what we experience in the timeline that we're on. You know, the timeline that was predetermined? Yeah, that one. Again,
By our choices.
right, by the choices, because you do have to choose. I did choose to knock over the water bottle, but I would have chose it no matter what. Given that same moment with the same influence and the same information, no other choice could have been made, even though it is a choice. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. So
If all those choices are infinite, then there is infinite is infinite, right?
correct.
Isn't that freedom?
So here's the thing. Great question. The choice that you were going to make may be predetermined, but just because that's the choice you made, there are still choices, possibilities of what could have otherwise happened, not possibilities of what otherwise could have been chosen. But for example, actions I can't take. Okay. I can't drop the asteroid from the sky, right? That would have been in motion for an infinite, could be 13 billion years, right? Our understanding of the age of the universe, 4 billion years. That could have been something set in motion eons ago. Could have simultaneously happened. It's a non-zero chance. So here's conceptually this many worlds theory kind of aligns with the concept of superstring theory. And Kevin would shoot me right now for connecting the two of these without having the PhD to do it, but I'm going to try. So superstring theory talks about the concept of very, very tiny things, smaller than subatomic particles, sitting at what they call the Planck length. It's the smallest understanding of size. If you think the atom is the size of the planet, a Planck length would be about the size of an atom. It may be smaller, comparatively speaking. It's incredibly small. And the concept of string theory is that there are these vibrational strings that make up all of everything. And it's spooky close to how they...
is just a word we put on there
Correct.
to try to visualize something that's...
Correct. And part of that, and I don't know the math, but I've read about the math, and unfortunately I don't have the math background to do the math, is the understanding that these strings exist in more than 3 dimensions. So we experience the world in effectively 4 dimensions, right? Up, down, left, right, forward and back, and then time.
Mm-hmm.
Those are our 4 dimensions that we live life. Hey, I'm going to meet you at church at noon on Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
That's a when and a where, 3-dimensional location and time. That's how we experience the world.
Mm-hmm.
Superstring theory posits there's as many as 10 dimensions.
I thought it
And
was 11.
that regular string theory is 11. There's a variation that's 23. Superstring theory is 10.
Okay.
The idea being that there are these extremely small additional dimensions for existence. And mathematically, they have evidence that this exists without having proofs that this exists yet. This is theoretical stuff for the last 60 years or more. Kevin could give us an exact date, I'm sure.
Yeah, and he would also say, I believe, that there hasn't been any experimentation that produced any kind of empirical evidence.
No, it's all math based.
Theoretical.
Yes, correct.
All hypothetical.
Correct.
All in this. It's really not. It's all mathematical. Yes.
Yeah,
Let's just say
correct.
that way.
It exists only in the math currently, and it may only ever exist in the math. Because we experience the world in 4 dimensions, and now you're talking a 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and potentially 10th dimension.
Yeah.
How do you conduct an experiment in a physical dimension that you don't experience? Like conceptually, I can't imagine that.
Yeah.
The idea behind it, though, theoretically, is that each of those additional dimensions could also be relegated to the realm of possibility. So the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is a great example. It talks about the information that we can know about a particle's location and movement at any given time. You can know its direction of movement, or you can know its speed, but you can't know both. The more you know of one, the less you know of the other. It's how the math works out.
Okay. Yeah.
It's an uncertainty. Well, the idea behind these extra potential dimensions is that they are all possibilities of locations and actions and these kinds of things. One of the ideas is that each of these extra layers of dimensions is a new possibility. So, for example, a 6th dimension possibility may have been something spawning from the start of our universe as it was spawned. We'll call it the Big Bang. You can call it creation. Whatever your theology and science lead you to believe is true, we'll call that the beginning of God said let there be light. Whatever. 7th dimension may have been all of the possibilities that spawned from that moment. 8th dimension may have been all of the possibilities that spawned from moments that weren't that moment. All the things that it could have been the way it started. Up through the 10th dimension, which is a culmination of all of the possibilities. All wildly possible stuff. Things that we can't necessarily ever know.
Mm-hmm.
The concept being, for me, that if God exists there, and I'm trying to define him here, well, no wonder I'm struggling.
Yeah.
So for me, the peace that I have found so far, and I got a lot of years left probably to find more peace, is that maybe that alone.
Or more turmoil. Whatever you're supposed to.
Whatever I'm supposed to.
Okay.
Maybe that alone. I would like to get past determinism, to be honest with you, if I'm supposed to. That alone can make up the difference for me conceptually.
Yeah.
Not in a, hey, God works in mysterious ways, because I don't buy into that. If God, we've been given too much understanding of things.
You don't buy into it as an
the mysticism,
for
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I would rather just say I don't know than God works in mysterious ways.
Okay,
so
I get that.
I'm 40 this year. Let's say I live an average life, 75, 80 years old, which hopefully modern medicine will extend that with quality of life. The amount of greater understanding we may encompass just in my lifespan, we may never get here, but if we go from here to here, that could change the whole nature of the game.
Oh yeah,
and I'm excited to see it, Brett. I'm excited to walk that path and talk in word salad to people that don't really want to listen, so I sound like a babbling idiot on the train. Is really what I'm at.
You don't sound like a babbling idiot to me.
Well, that's good.
Not because I'm so smart, but just because my mind gets tripped up in similar ways.
As it always was supposed to.
Yeah.
I've made a giant mess on your table here, too.
So do you feel like, just to kind of, put a cap on it, do you feel like that's helped you to reconstruct something that would be a faith in a creator?
Oh, I would say yes, but I'm only in my infancy in that thought process. I don't know that I've ever doubted creation. I mean, to my knowledge, we exist. And let's not get philosophical on me proving that we exist, because we can agree that that's not possible. Oh, God. I don't know how much more time I can spend doing this.
I know. You're going to get me off on a thing. All right, so go ahead.
But yes, I can firmly say that I accept the possibility of a greater power, with the very least with its thumb on the scales, but most likely having created the whole thing. What I struggle with is the biblical interpretation of what that may be.
Okay.
And that, I think, is a conversation we can dive into whenever you're ready. But
how long have we been here?
It doesn't have to be today, because we've been here for a while.
It can't be today, but
that would be a good as a conversation among friends.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's a necessary requirement for all the other things to work.
No, but I'll leave you with this: the biblical notion of God is much bigger than the average person tends to see when they read the Bible.
So then I will leave you with this. If God wishes for us to understand him, don't you think he'd make it a little easier reading?
No, because what do you mean by understand him?
Is that not the point? To have a closer relationship with God?
It is. That is the
well,
point.
Sure, especially if God's over here.
Yeah. So let me add this, that the biblical... Gosh, yeah, you're right. This is a big conversation.
I know, and I'm sorry.
The Bible...
Stay tuned for part number 2.
Version of God, actually versions of God in the Bible, are expressions of people's, experiences and beliefs, sometimes based on experience, sometimes just on their thoughts.
And
about
that I can completely get behind.
But the church has historically, and so has Judaism, divvied up Scripture, interpretation of Scripture, into 4 levels, at least 4.
Sure.
The literal, historic, the typological, the relationship between, for the church anyway, New Testament and Old Testament, the allegorical, and then the anagological.
See, now you're making up words.
The last one, to explain that word, because I might have that word wrong, is a word that means it would be applied to the mystic.
Okay.
And by mystic, I mean a person that understands that
all of this part over here could be considered mystic.
Yes.
From this perspective.
Yeah. But there's a lot in the Scriptures that can be interpreted that way so that it doesn't look silly.
Okay.
and to be frank, in most churches, you're not going to find that.
No, you're not.
You're not.
One of the things I love about Suncoast, and one of the things that has kept me coming back, other than the great relationships and most recently the popcorn, is the acceptance of the fact that everybody that comes here has a different perspective. Everybody that comes here has a different walk with faith. Some no walk. Some that are like me, that have gone down a path and deconstructed themselves and dug a hole and started burying themselves in and trying to climb out. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. You're accepted here, mm-hmm. and I love that. And that's one of the things that will keep me coming back for as long as I'm able to do so, is because we can sit and have conversations like this. Give me another break. What other pastor have I ever met that would be that doesn't work here, that I'd be able to sit and have a conversation like this with and not shunned?
I'm sure there are a few out there, but there aren't too many.
Not that I know of.
No.
And I don't profess to know all of those 8 billion people like you do. But yeah, they may exist, but they're few and far between. Thanks, I appreciate that. I can go pick their brains and see if they can tell me these unanswerable questions. And bother them for an hour, right?
No, this is fun, man. I love this.
We didn't even have alcohol for this, man.
I know. I feel bad about that. I actually
I still have to work.
I'm going to stop by the liquor store, bring some bourbon in.
Don't worry, I'll be back tonight, though. We have Encore tonight, which is going to be great.
True. Yeah.
It's always a good time.
Some bourbon there.
In the summer, absolutely. Sammy's got to drive, so that works for me. All right, man.
I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too, brother, very much.
Thanks for your willingness to do this and talk.
Thanks for tolerating me. That's all I look for out of others.
Good.